welcome everyone to this webinar on International Women's Day on the subject of women in leadership and the role of HR and senior leaders. We're delighted that so many of you can join us and that there are people who are still joining. My name is Judith Parsons. I'm a faculty member at Ashridge. And one of the areas that I devote a lot of my working time to here is the development of women in leadership. And a lot of my work is about supporting women who are aspiring into leadership roles, as well as researching and writing. So I'm actually going to share with you a little bit of background about us as an organisation, first of all. So Hult Ashridge is actually a part of a wider group called Education First. Education First is the largest private education company in the world. It has a very, very diverse portfolio that includes an international business school. It includes the executive education function, who are bringing this webinar to you today and that I belong to. And it's also a major language education provider too. So you may have heard of EF. If you haven't heard of them, I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot more of them in the future. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have a very impressive panel, all of whom are very much at the forefront of work in the field of advancing women in organisations. So if I can ask them to very briefly introduce themselves first. Nandini, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you, Judith. I'm very happy to be with you today on a topic that is close to my heart and to all our hearts, I believe. So today I'm speaking on behalf of Esprit de Service France. So I'm connected from Paris, France, and representing this do tank, which is gathering a number of companies from the service industry. I have about 30 years of experience in HR change, in CSR, in different large French and American organizations. I have been very much involved in promoting diversity at all levels in the organizations and everywhere in the world. I've worked in different countries, and I have also co-founded a certificate for women and for HR directors to join boards in various companies. I have promoted the first woman in a plant also 30 years ago. And my passion is about people, about leadership, and about change.
Thank you. David, would you like to carry on?
Of course, thank you, Judith, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you are. I'm a director within the UK Transportation Division of Atkins, who are a member of the SNC Lavalin Group, a global engineering and program management business. In the UK, engineering's not an industry known for its gender balance. Indeed, only about 1 in 8 of professionally qualified engineers are women. But I'm an engineer myself. But for the last 5 years or so, I've been leading, from a business perspective, the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda and strategy within Atkins across the UK and Europe region. And as part of that, I've also been involved in a number of industry bodies, such as the Royal Academy of Engineering's Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Group. So I'm very much looking forward to this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Garda.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm joining from Egypt. Currently, I am the Associate Dean for Executive Education and External Relations at the School of Business of the American University in Cairo. I'm also the founder of the Women on Boards Observatory in Egypt, and this is the flagship program that I will be talking about more later today. And I'm also a proud alumna of the Ashridge Doctorate in Organizational Change. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Chris.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or even good evening, looking at where some people are logging in to today. I'm Chris Oglethorpe. I'm the HR Director at the international law firm Gowling WLG. So give a professional services perspective perhaps to today's proceedings. We're in a privileged position whereby the bulk of our workforce are female. However, the challenge for professional services is often making sure there's proper gender representation at senior leadership levels and in particular at partner levels. So I'm here to help celebrate International Women's Day with everybody today and to share some insights and answer any questions that you might have. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel.
Thank you very much, Chris. And we're going to be hearing obviously much more from the panel as we go through the webinar. So we wanted to share with you how we plan to use the time today. We feel that today is a great day to actually take stock of where women are in organisations and particularly where they are on the leadership agenda. We're keen to look at what is working, where are we making progress, what remains challenging and still yet to overcome. We're very keen to keep the focus of the webinar on the very practical and to hear from our panelists what they've been involved in, what they feel has made a difference and where they see the challenges and the important issues yet to tackle. We're very keen to leave you with some takeaways, which we've already been doing some thinking of in terms of, from our experience, what are the 4 or 5 key things that you can really major on that are most likely to make a difference. We also very much want this to be centered around your questions too. So we're creating space in the webinar towards the end for your own questions. And we very much welcome your thoughts, your comments in the chat as we go through. Our colleagues are actually monitoring the chat very carefully. And if there are questions that you'd like to put to the panel directly, if you can actually include them in the chat, and we will bring those forward at the appropriate point in the webinar. So that's our intent for the hour that we have together. Where are we starting? So we see this very much as a day of celebration. It is International Women's Day. We're keen to recognise the achievements of women in all spheres of life, both professional and personal. But in particular, we want to actually recognise how well women are doing at the moment in the leadership arena. Now, you've probably all noticed as the audience here today that there's been a surge in interest in the whole subject of women and leadership. And it's a very, very positive picture, which has both affirmed what women bring to leadership and also how that correlates with bottom line performance in organizations. So these are just a few of the prominent pieces of research that are around at the moment that have been published within the last year. You may know them and you may not, but HBR, for example, published quite a significant report about a year ago, showing that on the vast majority of leadership competencies, women were rated more highly than men. Also, HBR released a report last year saying that women were perceived both organisationally and politically as better able to lead in a crisis. We've also seen some of the financial press like the FT and Bram Finance reporting a very strong correlation between women and the capabilities that they bring to leadership and bottom line performance. And that's not just financial performance, that's performance against a whole range of indicators that includes financial performance and also important indicators like cultural indicators, retention and engagement. And then about 2 weeks ago, we saw that the FTSE no longer had any male only boards, which is quite a significant milestone, although it's a fragile figure, and that does, sometimes that does drop out, and we have boards again that are male dominated, but the trend is in the right direction. So we wanted to take a moment to celebrate that very affirming picture for women leaders, but also to ask our panel, what are you celebrating today? And I wonder if we might start with you, Chris. What's uppermost for you today? What are you celebrating?
Thanks, Judith. Yes, I suppose I'm celebrating a couple of things. As the slides have shown, it's really encouraging to see some of the progress, but I think we can't be complacent with that progress, and there's much more to do to see better gender balance at more senior levels in the firms. Specifically for my firm, I'm celebrating the fact that tomorrow I'm taking to our executive board our recommendations for partner promotion. That's our most senior people in our firm. Over 70% of those promotees, assuming they're approved, of course, are female. And that's a huge turnaround in the context of typical law firm percentages. It improves our gender balance at partnership, but as I said, it's progress, but not where we want to get to. So plenty to do there. And if I might just take one more in terms of personally, my first line manager was a lady called Jane Geimer. I entered as a graduate recruit into BT PLC, and I have a huge amount to thank her for in terms of where I stand today in terms of my career. She set me in the right path, was a great guidance, and proved a mentor beyond my time working for her.
Thank you, Chris. And Nandini, could we go to you next? You're on mute, Nandini. Okay, we'll come back to Nandini. Garda, what are you celebrating on International Women's Day?
I'm celebrating that our indicator for the representation of women on boards in Egypt has improved this year. It was 10% in 2019, and it's 13% this year. So we're still a long way from our target of 30% by 2030, but it's definitely moving significantly in the right direction.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. Probably a couple of things for me. The first is a sort of more general one, which is I'm absolutely through the work I'm involved with, seeing a much greater engagement in this topic around how we get a much greater diversity of people involved and that sort of whole inclusion agenda. So I'm really encouraged by that, actually, and it certainly reflects some of the comments here that there's a real interest at all levels of the organisation I'm part of. And then I think from a more personal perspective, having been in the engineering industry for 35 years, it's only in the last 2 years that I've had a female boss. And, you know, it's a shame it's taken so long to get there, but it's been really good. She's been really engaging, really focused, and actually very decisive as well. So only positive experiences from that, and hopefully there'll be more in the future.
Thank you. And Nandini?
I'm celebrating the fact that there is more and more awareness, and I think we can be proud of the progress made so far, but we can also be proud of the fact that we all know that there is much more to do. And if I take just one example of one country, France has introduced a law 10 years ago to have more female in boards in large companies. And 10 years after, there is this awareness that this did not drive as much change as expected in senior leadership roles and in executive committees. And so most probably there will be another law coming in. And I think the more we have history, the more we realize that the quotas do push actually the change, but there is much more to do. And I think we can celebrate the fact that there is this engagement to do more and to make sure that we go one or even more steps forward. So happy International Women's Day to all.
Thank you. Thank you. And picking up that point that there is more to do, I think that's really where we want to go next. So we're saying it's a day for celebration, but it's not a day for complacency. And some of the research which has come out recently on the whole position of women in organizational life is really showing that we have quite a challenge ahead. And this is a McKinsey report that, again, people may have come across. It was released last year in 2020, but the gains for women in organizations, as you can see, this is global data, are marginal, really. They're worrying, these figures, with no change at all in the level of women's participation in the labour market overall. Limited gains on the number of women finding their way into leadership roles. It's concerning data. Again, if we look at the position of women holding board level roles, we can see that if we look at the FTSE, for example, very few women within the FTSE 350, 17 women currently who are CEOs, 41 women who are chairs, slightly better, but not much better for chief financial officers. Very, very striking is that only 2.9% of those roles are held by women of colour, which is very concerning. And if you look at the global picture, roughly 20% of board positions are held by women around the world. So a long way to go on the representation of women in the most significant senior roles in organizations. And again, we're finding that the history here gets built at a much earlier stage, and the career pipeline for women is a leaky pipeline. So for every man that gets appointed to a first managerial role, there are only 72 women and 58 women of colour. So we're not bringing the pipeline of female talent forward in the level and at the rate that we need to. So work still to do against the background of some very encouraging data. But it really rather begs the question of why, when women are proven to be such effective leaders and for organizations to benefit so significantly from their participation at senior level, that we are not doing better on the overall pattern for women being represented at very senior levels in organizations. So we want to actually, I'm going to stop the slide share there for a moment. This is where we actually want to turn to our panel for their experience and to hear what they've been involved with and what sort of things they've had success with. So I wonder if we can start with a question to the panel. What have you been doing? Where have you had success? And can you give us some examples of the sorts of things that have made difference in your own organization? I wonder, Nandini, could we start with you?
Yes, I think one of the things that have proven successful each time we have tried that in the various organizations I was in was regarding, for example, promotion or recruitment. Each time you have a position to fill, if you actually asked to have as many men and women in the short list of candidates proposed, then the change comes. But you have to make that effort. If you don't speak out and ask for that, you don't get it. And this is one of the key to success, which is don't look at the pipeline the same way as usual, but extend your pipeline of talent and ask for more, in fact. And be sure that there are female candidates, be it for internal promotion or for external hires. So this is one of the key to success. The second key to success is the set of criteria also. So if you want to hire successful candidates, you have to change the way you look at success. Is success only the financial success? Is success only the success in the area of expertise? Or do you use a wider range? Each time we have tried also to use a wider range of criteria for successful candidates. Again, we have been successful in hiring and promoting more women.
And did you actually see evidence of that success in the organizations that you've been
Yes,
working
absolutely. And it started with my first experience. That was 30 years ago. It seems ages now, but I started in a plant, and in that plant, there were only male leaders. And that plant was facing tremendous change, and we introduced performance reviews for all the people in the plant, and not only the managers. And when we started measuring the individual contribution to the result of the plant, then it highlighted also the success of several women, and particularly one who was then promoted to lead a team, which would have never happened if we had not introduced this performance review, individual performance review for everybody in the plant. So this is one example. Another example, like 20 years later, we hired in one country, in the organization I was in, we hired the first female CEO in that country, the first female CEO ever. And that company had a long history. And again, what worked was that we did ask the headhunter to give us a short list with as many men as women. And this is how we got there, because had we not asked for it, we would not have got it. We wouldn't have get it, because this was not the tradition in that country. Very few females are CEOs in that country. So there are also the cultural differences that we have to overcome. But you just get what you ask for. I think one of the lessons is also that you have to ask for it, and then you get it.
So I'm seeing both Chris and Garda nodding vigorously here, and I'm wondering, let's go to Chris. You were nodding there, and let's take you and hear what Garda has to say too.
I thought I might just build on Nandini's story. So one of the things that we've done, and we've been really quite thoughtful about, is we don't think we're making progress quick enough as a firm. So rather than layer initiative over initiative over initiative, because we thought we were doing the right things on talent management and mentoring, etc., we did a fundamental piece of research across our firm last year, interviewing our female and male partners, past and present, our talented female lawyers, and looked externally in the marketplace. And basically tried to start to look at what it was that enabled people to be successful in coming up through the talent pipeline and making senior leadership positions. It was a piece of work we called Thriving in Partnership. So not much creativity there, because that was what it was about, helping senior females be successful in their roles and moving up through the organization. One of the things, so we really wanted to get to the heart of what was holding people back, what were the barriers, what do we need to do differently? And that generated a series of recommendations within our firm. So we set up a task force of volunteers from across the firm. And actually, I think that's quite an important thing. Rather than just a board dictating progress, getting people involved in the change is really important. So one very specific thing we introduced was a sponsorship program, active sponsorship for our talented female lawyers and lawyers from a BAME background, to actively draw them up through the pipeline, give them exposure to what was required, and to see them come through as potential partners. And I mentioned earlier in what I was celebrating today, perhaps the first signs of the progress of that sponsorship scheme was the fact that I'm seeking approval for our partnership cohort being 72% female. But I think there's more, but it then sets up a whole raft of other component parts. So my second recommendation is to take these criteria, or these what you're trying to do, and bring it to life in local business divisions or subsidiaries or whatever else, and hold them to account for their own local plan. Again, rather than just setting things at board levels and hoping it will filter down through the organization and countries and divisions will make progress, starting to set the challenge in those local divisional areas with targets as well as tools, I think does start to make progress. It makes it real for the local management and real for the people who want to progress up and through the firm. And in our case, as I mentioned earlier, that's regularly and more frequently actually female lawyers. So those are two practical things I'd really encourage people to think about, making it real on the ground locally, and then things like sponsorship programs.
Thank you. Yeah, Garda, did you want to build on that?
Yes, I do, because what I've been working on is very similar to what Chris just described, but at a macro level, at the national level. So I come from an Arab country. It's a country with, as maybe the stereotypes would show, there is an entitlement and masculinity that is maybe not as progressive as other parts of the world. There is privilege. So having the conversations about women in senior positions is difficult. It's difficult under any context in any organization, but I was looking at my particular context to see how we can change this. My intention in starting the Women on Boards Observatory was not only for gender equality. As I think for all of us, we understand that diversity is not an end in itself. It's diversity because it is better governance, because it is better for the firm, because it is better for society. In my case, I was looking at changing mindsets in society. So the initiative that I started as the Women on Boards Observatory included a consortium of government organizations, regulators, so that we could guarantee the sustainability of gathering gender disaggregated data. And this was an important first step. You had to have the baseline, you have to know what your starting point is. Having the data and producing regular monitoring reports changes the conversation, because then people have the evidence of where are we. We can't start from should we have women on boards, because our very first report showed that they were already 10%. It's a matter of, so where do we want to go and how do we improve? So you're able to frame and change the conversation. Then you actually have to be ready for setbacks. You have to know that it's not a linear forward going journey. We have had setbacks. But if you start with perseverance and vision, then you're able to be ready when the right moment comes, because you're able to make progress in particular institutional moments. So when the right moment comes, you have the data, you have some solutions, you have some examples, and so on. So the right moment for us came in 2017, when we had a new president for the National Council for Women. She developed a national strategy. She set the target of 30% for women in leadership positions. We were able to tag onto that and create an observatory that was recognized at a national level and follow the same thing. So all of these areas come together, but you have to be ready with all the components. So data was very important. Understanding the challenges in your context, whether it's the organization or at a national level, is important. And looking at the pipeline is our issue was not only finding the women. It was trying to change the mindsets of the men who are in positions of power to give up their entitlement or their privilege, especially in senior management when it's a zero-sum game. You can't expand the number of people to allow everyone to be on the board or everyone to be a CEO. In the end, you're going to choose someone over a woman over a man, all qualifications being equal. So these are very difficult conversations to have. So we created a database of qualified women. We started providing a placement service and participated in training and awareness events.
Thank you. So there's a really strong theme coming through about targets and insisting. I'm going to borrow Nandini's phrase of insisting on what you want as you know, the criteria for recruitment processes and internal promotions and so forth. And David, did you want to come in from your experience on some of this?
Absolutely. That's the problem with going after three impassioned contributions there. There's lots I could build on, but I'll maybe just pick on a couple. Just taking Nandini's point, actually, one of the things I've done personally and we've tried to do is actually just look at the roles that we have. And because a lot, particularly from a sort of engineering context, a lot of them have been shaped over many years. And if somebody leaves, your temptation is to roll out the same job description. And actually I had some experience where I completely rewrote a job description for a role that reported to myself. And I made it much more gender balanced in the language it used and the focus of the role. And I actually got a really balanced application list and was able to appoint 2 of the 3 roles to women. So I think just looking at the roles you have to get that better balance. Something else that we did, and we've had it running for 10 years, is a specific development program for women. And it wasn't new material, but it was put together in a way that actually helped a number of our sort of mid-grade women together sort of develop. So it was all training and a material that was available to the whole of the group, but it was packaged together in sort of 2 or 3 sessions where that proved very effective. And over the last 10 years, we've had in excess of 500 mid-level women going through it, a number of whom have now moved on into senior roles. And probably just the one final thing I've said is, is that actually getting everybody engaged in it. I think it's partly picking up Chris's point. You want the whole population of the organisation to take an interest in this and be involved, and to start to take ownership of things. So actually, for the first time this year, everybody in the organisation has been set a personal objective around the whole equality, diversity, inclusion agenda. Not the same objective for everybody. It's appropriate to their role, but actually it gives real focus to it.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm seeing the comments coming through in the chat, and something which is actually catching people's interest is this whole question of rewriting. So Nandini mentioned it, saying, we have to redefine the performance of organisations. And David, there's also a question directed to you about what did you rewrite? And I think that was about the vacancies becoming available, and saying, okay, this is the time to rewrite the job so that we don't just reappoint the same type of person. Can both of you say a little bit more, and indeed other panel members as well, this process of the opportunity to rewrite is quite figural. Can you say a bit more to our audience about that?
Shall I just pick off the one thing I mentioned? So we used a gender decoder. I don't like the term, but there are words that I definitely sort of recognise as more masculine, and so using words like challenging and driving, and actually putting in some more words that were perhaps a bit more reflective, a bit more about advocacy or empathy. Still trying to achieve the same aims, but just change that language a bit to make it more appealing. And it seemed to work. You could type it in Google and it will come up with tools that you can use. It was really quite simple. We're also getting different people to look at your job description. So, well, how does this read to you? What do you read into it? Because I think you're blinkered when you do this, particularly if you're the post holder itself or have held that similar post previously.
Okay.
Judith, can I respond to some of the comments or questions, because it's something that I'm very passionate about. It's a question about quotas versus targets. When I hear the word quota, I always remember Viviane Reding, who was a commissioner in the European Union, and she's the one who started the whole 40% women on boards sort of decrees or regulations. And her quote was like that: I do not like quotas, but I like what they do. So I believe in quotas, and I believe in quotas for a short amount of time. And in order to enforce quotas, they have to have consequences. So when MSCI were looking at the representation of women on boards globally, they broke down the countries that were able at a national level to achieve progress. And they were the ones who had consequences for not complying with a regulation. So if you say that you in order to be listed on a stock exchange, you have to have a certain percentage of women on boards, and then nothing happens if you don't comply, then you're not going to achieve progress. But if you actually get the threat of delisting, then things will be different. So I think that if there is a national target and companies are encouraged, and I think the same applies to an organization. If you have targets in your organization, but you're not tying the KPIs of the performance of the CEO on achieving those targets, then you're not going to get a result. So whether you call them targets or quotas, the important thing is that you have consequences for non-compliance.
Thanks, Ghada.
Yes. And I do believe also that you have to be consistent with the targets, in fact, in what you do. Meaning that I think that the rewriting part is very important, in fact. For instance, if you say that you want more women CEOs, and if you continue to have briefs asking for people who have already had a P&L responsibility, the fact is that you will lack women because there are not that many women having P&L responsibilities. So then you have to change your description, and you have to actually look for what is it at stake when you have a P&L responsibility, and then you enlarge the way you write your specification, in fact. So you have to go to dig more into what it takes to take such a role. And that's why you have to look at not only another vocabulary, but also a way to attract and to select diverse people who have other backgrounds, but who actually can meet the job requirements. But then you have to be consistent with your target. If you want more women, then you have to look for women in other positions, because otherwise you will never get there. So I think the effort that you make to rewrite a job description is an effort about what is the purpose, what is your target, where do you want to go. So the why and the where is very important to make the change happen.
And Chris, you're wanting to come in on that.
Well, I just wonder whether there's another dimension to the quotas piece, and I'd be interesting if this sparks questions or not. That internally, it's fantastic where organisations set either targets or perhaps look at quotas. But equally, I think there are other ways of people trying to move the needle on things like gender balance. So we're a provider of legal services. So our client's voice in asking us to have gender balanced legal teams or a more gender balanced partnership and not instructing us if we don't is a really powerful tool to make progress in society. But equally, it's a reminder for us that we need to make more progress. So there's something about clients demanding this. And there's another piece that then leads me down through the supply chain. As big organizations where we procure things, do we worry about the progress that our suppliers are making around gender balance and gender equality? Because if not, we need to stop and think about what are we doing. This is a whole business issue, and we can make requests, demands, requirements of suppliers as clients can for us. So I'm just wondering whether we need to approach targets and the balance from every single angle if we want to make a fundamental change, not just one within our organization. So that was just a observation, a thought that sparked from the comments we've had so far.
I'm wondering go ahead, Nandini.
To build on that, I think we are all passionate about the subject. I would like to build on what Chris just said. With one of my colleagues, we have written an article about that, about the quotas and the history of the quotas, especially with that law in France, and the changes it did actually push and what did not happen and why. And I think you're right. We have to look at the global picture because quotas is one way. It's true that when you do not have quotas, nothing actually does happen. But when you do have those quotas, when you do have targets, objectives, that's not enough. You have also to put on board people who will drive the change. Because in fact, the numbers do move the needle, but the actual change within organizations that change is made by the men and women who are in those organizations. So what we have seen is that each time there has been a quota, in fact, the first tendency is to comply by the law. So when you don't want to comply, you meet the numbers and you don't look at what is the purpose of the number beyond compliance. But when you start looking at what is the purpose, then you start looking at the profiles. Mm-hmm. What we have seen is that so far, the people who have benefited from those quotas, yes, there are more women, but those women have not necessarily made the change happen within their organizations because their mandate was not this one. The first mandate was, let's be compliant by the law. Then you have to look at the profiles, and the change makers are not the same, and they don't come from the same background. So if you look again at the different criteria, and then you connect business, strategy, the criteria, the profile, then you will make the change happen really deep in the organization. And you change the culture, and you change the mindset, and you change the management style. And that's what it is about, I believe.
Okay. So I'm very conscious of where we are with time, and that we also want to involve our audience and some of their questions. And I can see the questions coming through, and I'm going to suggest that we start to bring some of those questions into the conversation. There was a fascinating question earlier on about the burden of COVID on women. And their wider responsibilities for care and so forth. And I can't actually now see it in the Q&A, but it was also saying that there is something really important about not adding an even greater burden on women to perform in a way that justifies their place, if you like, in more senior roles. So how do we elevate women without actually making this another really tough burden and double bind? What do you think, panel, on that question? And are we learning something important from COVID? And I wonder, David, whether we might start with you, because we had a very interesting conversation about this when we first spoke. But
so yeah, a couple of thoughts. I think it's widely accepted that the COVID pandemic has had a greater adverse impact on women in general across all industries because of, particularly because of those caring responsibilities, which historically they take a greater proportion of, be that young or older generation caring for. At the same time, something that I've certainly observed within my organisation, though, is that one thing that the pandemic has done is introduce much greater flexibility in the way people work. And actually, for an industry that historically in engineering hasn't been that flexible in working patterns, it's typically required long hours, people being present in a workplace. It's actually demonstrated that actually we could still be very effective where people have been working remotely. So I think yes, there's been that impact, but at the same time, it's, I think, demonstrated the ability to be more flexible, and some of those expectations we thought previously, couldn't possibly happen. We've demonstrated actually you can lead remotely. Doesn't mean you've got to be in the office, on the site, in the factory 5 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what are other people's experiences of that?
One of the things I'd like to add here, and again, from a developing country context, and again, at a national level or a macro level, not the organization only, is that we've had these conversations change when we use data. So we have a large informal economy in Egypt, and that employs a very large number of women, like many developing countries. So when we look at the economic contribution of women to the economy, we have to take that into account. And recently, this has been quantified in Egypt. So government research has shown that 1 in 5 households in Egypt, a country whose population is over 100 million, is female-led. The woman is the main breadwinner in 20% of the households in Egypt. So when you use this kind of data, when you look at the quantification of the value of the care economy in Egypt, where women take the larger burden, these kinds of pieces of information really do change the conversation in my experience, so that you're able to look at the economy as a whole. It's not only formal employment, it's not only labor and wages that we understand, it's the whole livelihood of people, and sort of bringing our whole selves to organizations and to the workplace. So this kind of data helps us in changing conversations and helps change mindsets of people about the entitlement of women as well. They're already contributing to the economy. So it's not a matter of should women work or not, or are they contributing or not? They are. So how then do we do the right thing?
That's a powerful point. I'm noticing in the chat stream, there's a very, very strong theme there about how do we challenge masculinity and male attitudes. And God, I'm wondering if we could come first to you on that, because you're working in a particularly challenging context in that regard. How have you been successful in moving male attitudes along?
If we did not have the government regulation that now makes it a condition to have 1 woman on the board for companies to be listed, or for companies in the non-banking financial services to be registered, we would not have had the success. So it is getting the kind of change that is required for gender equality, in my view, is top-down. It is more important to have the senior, whether it's senior managers, senior administrators, president of the country, whoever is at the top, actually setting the tone. And this is the only way that enabled us to have the success. So you need that in order to accelerate the initiatives that we already had. That created the moment where change could happen. We saw a much more increase and demand from companies. Frankly speaking, I'm pragmatic. I don't care why they do it. If you're doing it to comply, I don't care. Eventually, the change will happen. So some of them are not convinced and they're just doing it for compliance. Some of them are trying to do no harm, and some are progressive and are doing good. Eventually, they'll come around. But to be fair, we still, as a society and within organizations, especially I think HR professionals, need to create the space for the difficult conversations to redefine the role of people who are going to lose privilege. Mm-hmm. They need to also find the language to talk about their new role. In my country, it would be masculinity, meaning man, the partner, not the provider. In an organization, it could be a colleague who is sharing with a peer who is a female, or having a female boss for the first time. So we need to create the space for people to have these conversations and to understand what their new role would entail.
Thank you. What about other panelists? Have you had experience or successes that where you've had to challenge masculinity or male attitude in your own workplaces?
Yes, sure. I've been most of the time I've been the first woman ever in the roles that I have had, and I've worked in very masculine environments like the automotive industry or other industries. And I think one of for me, there are 2 points that I would like to highlight. First, that there are stereotypes around masculinity and also around what it is to be a female leader. Mm-hmm. Actually, leadership is leadership. I don't believe that leadership has a gender as such. The fact is that over the years, there has been a dominating style because we've been hiring and promoting the same. and women have been very few, if any, in some industries, in some business units or whatever. What I have seen personally is that when I was the only one and the first, making the change happen was a real struggle. But when there was a second one and a third one, it was different. That is my experience, but this is also what the research shows. The numbers speak that way. You know, whenever you introduce difference, the change does come when you have more than one. You do have to have at least 30%. That's what I have seen from the research, and it's also my own experience. And you know, it's as the say goes, together we are stronger. So it's a question of number, and that number is beneficial for both for male and female, because when you look at those changes, my experience is that those changes have also been beneficial for male who did not speak out also about their expectations in terms of leadership and management and culture within the organizations. But when we women came in and we started also pushing that change, we realized that all together we had a common vision about what leadership today means, and for today and for tomorrow, and what is actually sustainable. So I think that's the main point. You need the numbers, so we have to be more. There has to be more of us everywhere. We are half of the population. We should be half in the organization, and it's where we can actually, you know, build more resilient organizations, drive more sustainable growth, I think.
So can I just add to that, because I think, you know, it's really important that, you know, we encourage men to speak up about this as well. It shouldn't always be, you know, for the women to speak up. You know, men need to own this as well. And to me, I was thinking of it in two dimensions. One is about hearts and minds. We need to absolutely make the arguments from a sort of business case perspective, why it's right, how it drives performance. And we've all read one or more reports that absolutely demonstrate that a more diverse business leads to better performance. But at the same time, you know, actually it's winning over people's hearts, because they're, you know, that there will be some suspicion. Some men will think it's somehow getting in the way of their progress, but actually it's absolutely the right thing to do. So, you know, I always think of it those two dimensions, hearts and minds. If you get both, then it'll really succeed.
Okay. I'm very conscious of time. I'm wondering if we could actually move to the slide with a summary of some of the key takeaways that we wanted to offer people today. Is that okay, Sophie, if we move on to those slides? But I also wanted to say that none of us are rushing off at 2 o'clock. So if people actually wanted to stay and put more of their questions to the panel, I know we'd be happy to carry the conversation on for a while. And there are some really, really strong questions in the chat coming through that I think we should try and find some time to address if people have time to stay. In terms of what we would suggest as takeaways from today, this is a collection that we put together. In some ways, we've actually spoken to them through the course of the conversation, but knowing the experience of women in your organization, we think is fundamental. I think the point was well made earlier that you can actually embark on lots of initiatives thinking that they are the right thing to do, but then finding that they miss the experience of women in your particular organization. So that's something which is a really key point, and often a very powerful way of changing things in its own right. I think Nandini's point about redefining performance has been picked up and also amplified by our audience quite a lot. And we've covered that at some length. Something that Garda has said, and I think it's echoed by other members of the panel, is that when you embark on this journey, it's important to be prepared to have the difficult conversations about both mindset and behaviors. And sometimes it is at a micro level of things like inadvertent silencing of women in organizations that needs to be spotted and challenged. Building role models at all levels. David, I think this came from you, that actually very often people look for their role model at the next layer up, not necessarily at the top of the organization, and that we need to be building female role models at all levels of management and leadership. And Chris's point was about helping people to become active bystanders and proactive allies. Chris, did you want to just add a little bit to that? Because I think it was an interesting point that you made, and some work that you're doing in your own organisation.
I'll add a bit to that, and I might just say something a bit more about role models, if that's okay. There's been a huge number of themes coming in on the chat and on the Q&A as well, some really interesting things. And the principle about active bystanders is supporting people have the conversations with their line manager or with when they observe the wrong behaviours, and calling things out in a way which is appropriate to either the organisation or the culture. So we've been helping equip people along this sort of active bystander piece. But equally, it needs champions. It needs proactive allies, champions of the change, champions to sponsor people, etc. So there's quite a lot to unpack within that very specific one. So if anybody wants to talk a bit more about that, very happy to do so. But on role models, I might just pick up just one point on role models. I'd add a word there. It's about relatable role models to me, because in some organizations you find you look up and you see the senior female leaders or male leaders and go, actually, I don't want to do that job. Or if it's a female leader who's perhaps adopted a more machismo approach, you don't want to be like that. You want to be your own person. And I think it's really quite important to think about the relatable role models and how we foster that within organizations. So that would be my build on the role model piece.
Thank you. And Sophie, I wonder, can we put up the final slide about continuing the conversation with Ashridge, if people are interested in that? Lovely, thank you. So this is the first of these webinars that we've devoted specifically to women. It won't be the last. We plan to run a series of these webinars. If you would like to keep the conversation going, we would love to talk further with you. There are things that we do with organisations, that we're doing with a number of clients, including helping you to understand the experience of women, to develop your talent strategy around women, to create pathways that support women into managerial roles, and also to address the really interesting and important question about how can we actually help men and women to work better together in organisations. So if any of those interest you, we would certainly be keen to continue that conversation. In terms of the types of questions that you've asked, if your question hasn't been asked or answered today, we're very open to keeping that conversation going. We'll carry on beyond 2 o'clock for people that actually want to stay on the call with some of our panel. But we would certainly be keen to follow up those conversations with you in whatever way actually works for you. So I think we're coming up to the hour, and I can see people leaving. Thank you for being such a participative audience around such a key subject. And can we say also thank you to our panel, who've given us phenomenal insight and their frankness and openness about where it's been successful, where they feel there are still challenges, has been incredibly useful. Thank you very much to everybody, and happy Women's Day.
Thank you very much, Judith. Thank you for the moderation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you too.
So I think, Sophie, what we will do is see how many people we have left who would like to continue the conversation.
I think we can go through one or two more questions.
Yeah? Do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, so the, let's see what we have. I mean, the questions are actually phenomenal questions, fascinating questions. So there's a question here from Michelle. What's your view on the use of psychometric assessment in hiring and development? And do gender neutral assessment tools help?
I can take that question. I think I would say one of the answer is if we look at the changes that are still to be made and the history of assessment, I would say that whatever we do with assessments would not be enough. From my experience, what I have seen working is when we twist the way we traditionally do the things. So the assessment do help, whether they are neutral or not. They have one purpose, but their purpose is not ultimately to achieve more diversity in the workplace. So I think the question of diversity and gender, including gender diversity in the workplace, goes far beyond the tools. To me, the main challenge is about the culture, is about the management, the leadership, and is about the identification and the pipeline, and looking at different places where women are, and rather than tools like assessment or whatever tools. And also, I believe that there is a trend, or let's say it's not exactly a trend, but things are changing in the world. The workplace is changing. So what has worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. So we have to be very creative also, I believe. That would be my answer.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Nandini. There's a question here directed towards Chris. How can we support really low-grade staff to progress?
So really good question. I think it probably depends a little bit about what country, what industry or sort of sector. I'd start by having clarity around promotion processes and eradicate any bias. We've talked about gender bias in those sort of promotion processes. I'd look at sponsorship to try and draw the most talented people up and through. And a number of components around that. As I say, I'm just seeing live on the chat, healthcare. It's not a sector that I have a huge amount of knowledge in, but some of my other panelists might have a bit more knowledge. But simple things, clear promotion criteria. Back to David's point earlier about roles that are, we remove any gender bias in terms of either the selection process or the description of them. And quite a lot of support around mentoring and development. But I don't know whether anybody else wants to build on that.
Shall I just pick up on that as well? And I totally endorse what you said there, Chris, but I certainly think there's a real role to be played for that. So whether it's mentoring, sponsorship, giving people the opportunity to see what the opportunities are. Certainly something we've seen in a UK type culture is often women won't apply for a promotion unless they think they will meet all the criteria for it, whereas men typically will go, oh, I meet 50% of the criteria, I'll give it a go, I can fill in the gaps. So just being aware of that and challenging ourselves as to some of those processes we're using around sort of talent and progressing our talent in our organizations.
Okay.
I think I'd just like to add a point, and it's a response to something that was mentioned also in the chat. Changing people's minds is a two-way process. So we don't have the responsibility ourselves to change their minds. If they're not willing to walk towards us as well, we will not change their minds. And I think each one of us now has to have the personal responsibility of deciding where they stand on the issue of gender and diversity. And if we feel that our own values are not aligned with those of the organization, maybe we are in a toxic environment that we should leave. So those are parts of the difficult questions. And those are part of the difficult conversations that we have to have, and not burden ourselves with the responsibility of trying to make it work at whatever cost, even if it's harmful for us, or taking the responsibility by ourselves to change everyone's mindset.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So there's also a question about the process for selection. How can we develop a process which is more suited to women than simply formal applications and interviews? Does anybody want to pick that question up?
I think regarding the process, first of all, we have to change the process as such for the benefit of everyone, again, because the times are changing, and we have to adapt and be much more inclusive. So we have to make sure that the processes, the hiring processes in place are really inclusive for everyone and for every talent, which means that there should be, I think, and it starts by the way the specifications are written, and I think David had already mentioned that part. But when you start challenging the way, in fact, the descriptions are written, then you start actually challenging the whole process. So, but I think more importantly than the process, there is a question about the culture of each and every sector. When you look at the research, you see that women are actually not attracted by some sectors. And because those sectors are known for having developed toxic cultures. The good news is that there is an awareness today, and that we do talk more about this, and people can speak out, not as much as they should, of course, but there is progress. And the real thing is that if you want a more diverse workforce, you really have to challenge your organization. And it's not a question of process, it's the question of culture, of mindset. And this is the thing that is most of the time forgotten. And there is not that much research, by the way, on the topic. But from my experience, I have seen that when we really work on what we are as an organization, what culture, what are the behaviors that are in place, then we really start making the change. And I think the point is there. And then the process will follow, in fact. But there is no process that will be successful and that will attract more women if you don't tackle the question of the culture. And I think, again, I have said this a lot already, but I strongly believe in that. Whatever is beneficial for women is also actually beneficial for men as well. And at times, men do not speak up also because they are in a dominating culture. But every man is not the same. And I think there is an awareness today that everyone is not the same, and that we have to have organization where there is a place for everyone.
Okay, I'm wondering if we should make this our last question. It's a question which is put in the form of a comment as well as a question, but it's saying, how do we break out of the pattern of fixing the excluded rather than fixing the organization. So this comes from someone who is working in race equality in the public sector, I believe, and saying that they keep coming up against this issue, that progress is seen as fixing excluded groups, whether those are Black and minority ethnic groups, women, people with disabilities. What does anybody have something to offer there on that final question?
Shall I kick off? I think I mean, it's a really valid question, and I think we're certainly in our organisation, as we've begun to focus more and more on the whole sort of the whole range of diversity, and we've put more emphasis on actually what are the barriers to people feeling included in the organisation and indeed in the sector we work in. That really helps, because if you know, it's not about fixing the issue with, say, gender balance, and then next week moving on and fixing the race issue, and then the following the sexuality issue. Actually, you start to address all of them at the same time, and actually the reality is this term intersectionality is people's identity is a whole host of factors, some of which may be protected characteristics. Okay, I don't fit in many of those sort of minority groups, but I do come from Wales. Well, that's a characteristic of mine. It doesn't, you know, so actually helping people to be themselves and creating a culture where people can be themselves, whatever that is, and can contribute that way. So I'm a real advocate for widening out the agenda, and that will benefit everybody in the long run.
Okay. Right, I think we should probably conclude there. Again, thank you everybody. I'm amazed we've still got over 100 people in the session, and I can see a question saying, how do we follow up this conversation with panel members afterwards? Sophie, do you want the very last word and to be able to say how you would normally follow up on a webinar such as this?
Yes, absolutely. Once we finish the session, we will be sending a recording out to everyone that registered.
Sorry, did we lose you there, Sophie? It sounded as though you got...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. No, I just say that we will be sending a recording to everyone that registered with the slides, and everyone is more than welcome to reach out to us if they would like to find out more. Okay, that's great. So again, to the audience, to the panel, thank you for a stimulating session. I feel we could go on for an awful lot longer. Enjoy the rest of Women's Day. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, same to you. And enjoy the week.
Bye.
And looking forward to talk to you again.
Yes.